My guest today is Michael Kong. Michael is an entrepreneur, he's a technologist, he is a software engineer, and he is currently the CEO of Fantom, which of course is a fast throughput open source smart contract platform. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate your time today. Yeah, happy to answer any questions you guys have. I don't say I'd really call myself an entrepreneur, but like someone who, yeah, is just like, I don't know, I guess like interested in building things or letting other people build it.
Awesome. Well, hey, I mean, that's a good background to be the CEO of a blockchain project, I reckon. So we can take it, Michael. So let's do what we do at the beginning of the show, which of course is just get to know you a little bit. So I understand you're from Australia, but not currently based in Australia. So look, I mean, we can argue as to whether you're an entrepreneur or not. Let's hear a bit about your background, and then perhaps the
Yeah.
listeners can decide for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, like I'm originally from Australia, so I moved to Nassau like towards the end of last year, which is in the Bahamas. So my background is I've been kind of like interested in just like programming and technology for like a number of years now. And when I studied at university, I studied finance and IT. So in at the University of Sydney, which is where I grew up in. I grew up in Sydney. So um, with finance and IT, it was known as like a double degree. So it was like a 5-year degree. So I was basically studying like 2 degrees like simultaneously or at the same time. And in 2015 or 2016, there was like I had heard about Bitcoin before and I'd bought some before in the prior years. But in 2015, 2016, there was a person at the University of Sydney who later moved to the US called Jacob Horn. He was telling me and other people about like Ethereum, and he was like a big Ethereum bull. And there were like a number of these individuals scattered across Sydney who were like very bullish about Ethereum. And he was telling me about like smart contracts, about like all this functionality you could do, and talking about even like some of the like stuff that would later become like DeFi, like being able to lend and borrow directly with other people, being able to run like all of these systems and settlement systems through blockchains, etc. So me and like a few other friends just started like playing around with smart contracts, starting to look at like how all this stuff worked, and kind of like found it all a bit interesting, and just like kind of like mucked around a bit. And then later, in 2016 and 2017, in order for me to finish my IT portion of the degree, I had to do like a major software project, which I ended up turning into a thesis. And you had to like apply for like a number of like someone to like work under, right? Like basically a supervisor. And there was one professor there called Bernard Schultz who has a background in programming languages and virtual machines and compilers and that sort of thing. So that was like area of expertise. And he was very interested in applying those sort of concepts that he knows in computer science to evaluating smart contracts. And so I managed to join a research team with him, with 3 others. And it was about building software to basically analyze exploits in smart contracts. And we did that by looking at the underlying like execution of the smart contracts, which is known as like virtual machine analysis, right? So I later transformed that into a thesis by looking at specific sort of exploits related to like calculation of like gas, right? Or like how much like usage, like a particular execution would occur, would consume when you're executing like a smart contract. And so around 2017, at the same time, and I took like an extra year because I went part-time for my degree partway through. While I was finishing off my thesis, I also started working as an engineer for a blockchain software company in Sydney, which is now quite big, called Blockade. So I was the first software engineer there, and I've worked on a number of big projects. And one of those big projects is Synthetic Network Token, which was known as Haven back in 2017 and early 2018. So we worked a little bit on that project with Kane, which was very interesting. But I left soon after in September 2017 on very good terms with the Blockade people. I still talk to them a lot because I ended up founding one of like Australia's first a digital asset like funds, and I found that, and I started that fund because I was very interested in starting a fund for a while now, but you needed to have like a financial services license, and I didn't have the qualifications to get that because I was just someone in their 20 who didn't have that sort of background. But I managed to partner with a number of people in finance who were like relatively famous, and we started like a fund together. And this is like how I began working on Fantom, is that we were running like an asset management fund, but at the same time we were also doing like advisory, particularly to do with like ICO projects. So ICOs were very big back in 2017, 2018. And one of the countries that it was very big in was Korea. And we managed to advise on a Korean project called Fantom back then in early 2018. And it consisted of a team of like a couple of like associate professors and postdoctoral students from Yonsei University, which is highly regarded as like one of like the top technical universities in Korea. But the problem is that, like many of our ICs around the time, it just kind of turned out to be vaporware. Like, they promised that they had solved a way of processing transactions asynchronously, massively increasing throughput while still like, maintaining security and fault tolerance and that sort of thing. But it turns out that they didn't actually have any of that work completed. So what we had to do, and it was a very tough time, is we basically had to like rebuild the team and restart. And so that's like where Andre also came in, because he helped me like rebuild the team, and because he has a background more in distributed computing than myself, he like gave us a lot of ideas to explore with, and we basically had to build a new team to kind of like get to the position that we are right now. So there was like a lot of luck involved, also some like right decisions made. So yeah, that's kind of like how I got to Fantom. So it wasn't, I didn't like originally come up with this idea about asynchronous processing of transactions. I didn't come up with like the consensus or anything like that. I didn't like really start the project, but I guess you could say that I helped restart the project, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, Michael. And man, you've gone through a lot of history and given us a lot of information there. People who be reasonably familiar with Fantom will be able to follow along, I imagine. I myself, I've been aware of Fantom, but it's not really something that I've really tracked too closely myself. So some of this is new to me. But a couple of threads I want to just get you to maybe pick up on there. It's fascinating that you kind of describe the early Fantom as, well, let's just say what you said, vaporware, and we're not being unkind to Fantom here. That was the case with
well, it's true. Yeah, it's 100%
the majority
true.
of ICO projects, right? Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
so
it was actually the average.
exactly right. And really, to your credit and to Fantom's credit, you guys have you're still here today, and you're still building, and you've turned this thing into an actual working protocol. And you certainly can't say that for a lot of those early ICO projects. So that is a big tick. We can come back to that maybe, but you also mentioned Andre. So I'd love you to expand a little bit there, because I know that's a slightly, I don't know if it's controversial amongst the Fantom community. Andre himself is a slightly controversial figure amongst, I suppose, the DeFi community. And I see that he's kind of was involved with Fantom early and then supposedly left, but has kind of resurfaced just in the last few days. So I guess there's maybe a bit going on here that you can catch us up on.
Yeah, this is going to kind of be like a long-winded answer, but I think it's something that's important for people to understand, right?
Yeah.
Because I know like a lot of people have like just recently found out about Fantom, or they found out about Fantom, this year or last year or the prior year in 2020, right? But like Andre's involvement has really gone back from the very beginning of Fantom, and I think it's important.
Sorry, Michael. Just tell us who is Andre. Some people will know, but some people won't. So just give us the background as to who Andre is first.
Yeah, sure. So Andre he's like his full name, or at least his first name and surname, are Andre Cronje, right? So he is a South African individual who lives in Cape Town, who has been involved in crypto basically since 2017. So originally he got like relatively famous because he was the technology writer for Crypto Briefing. So back then in 2017, he was like writing reviews of different software that he had discovered, right, or interesting projects and up-and-coming projects, including like Fantom, that were like performing ICOs, right? So he would kind of like go through like, the technology described, the team, sort of like the background, the idea, like all those sorts of like evaluation like methods, right? And he would give projects a score out of like 10, right? So if I remember correctly, he did an evaluation of Fantom, and I think he was relatively generous on it, and like he would kind of admit to it, and he gave us like a 7 out of 10, right? Based on these like evaluation metrics. So that was like early 2018 when Fantom was like doing its ICO, right? So like the whole like Fantom like idea or like how it got started was really like in February 2018. And I think by March or April 2018, it started to get quite well known because we were doing like like what we call like a pre-ICO round, like getting like institutions involved and, buying up the, the tokens in the project and basically like contributing their capital, right? Based on the promise of this like new technology. And so like Andre reached out to us and was very, very interested about how the technology worked because there were a lot of claims made by the Korean quote unquote like developers and like professors about the performance of technology and how it all worked. And because he has a genuine interest in distributed computing, which was kind of his background, it was sort of what was his like own personal passion. He spent a lot of time like researching in like well before, my understanding is well before like even Bitcoin existed. He was very much interested in knowing about how the technology worked, right? And then it later turned out that the technology that they were talking about wasn't actually developed as they had described it, right? So for example, they were talking about like that it had simulation, that it had basically a test net, and that got me really interested because he was like, wow, it's not just like theoretical what they're talking about. They actually have something that's working. Now, maybe it's not production ready, but it's something that is actually working, at least in a testnet environment, which is a lot more than like what other ICO projects had at the time, which was just like a white paper, right? So they claimed that it had a white paper, which I saw, and was like kind of like general. And I was like, okay, that's understandable because it's for a general audience. It's not supposed to be like super technical, but they were producing another technical paper and they already had simulation code done. So, Andre and I had asked for that simulation code to like look at it. And there was always an excuse like, oh, well, we're still fixing a few bugs. We're still ironing it out. We'll give it to you like next week. And then next week comes along, or we'll give it to you like a little while later, etc. Right? Like basically just delaying. And it turned out that that simulation code never existed. And the technical paper that I ended up kind of producing in the end, a friend of mine at the University of Sydney ran the paper. He was a bit suspicious as a background in distributed computing as well. He ran it through Turnitin, and which is like plagiarism checking software that like all the universities in Australia, or most of the universities at least, like use, right? And he found out that it was like plagiarized. The ideas were ripped off from the Swallows 2016 hashfile paper, right? And that what the professors and the authors had done is that they're basically taken out equations from the Swallows paper and just renamed the variables, right? And which is like almost like laughable if it wasn't like kind of like so sad about like what just happened here, because that's when I knew for sure that the technology was vaporware, and that's when Andre knew the technology was vaporware. So what he did was that first and foremost, he convinced me to stay, because in July 2018, when I found out that this had happened, I was like, my heart sank, right? Like I remember exactly where I was at the time. I was shopping in the supermarket, in a place called Neutral Bay, right? Basically, like I remember like what happened, right? And I was just like, very disappointed, very angry. Same with the fund that I was at. It was called Token Capital Management at the time, and I just wanted to like quit, right? But like Andre kind of like talked to me and talked to the other people at the fund. Was like, well, obviously this is not a great situation. It's true, but we have a bunch of money now, and we had the opportunity to kind of deliver on the original vision they talked about. Because in his opinion, it was possible to do that sort of thing, and that he had ideas on how to do it. So I ended up sticking around and basically like building like a new team with him. And we got lucky because we managed to hire some like really, really smart engineers and developers and researchers that knew like basically like what they were doing, right? And knew about distributed computing and were also like excellent developers, right? And some of those developers that built the underlying technology are with us to this very day. So that was like a big contribution. Skipping forward, his big contribution as well has been on the treasury management, right? So in February 2020, what Andre is also really famous for is his work in DeFi. In fact, that's probably his most famous work, right? So he was one of the DeFi pioneers or decentralized finance pioneers that created different sort of software. And the most famous type of like projects he created were around automatic market making, or AMM, right? And his first project in February 2020 was called iEarn, and that later became Yearn. And so what he did for Fantom specifically was that he managed to get us DeFi yield farming, yield generation from the very beginning, right? So we had all that time to farm on different projects, all that time to kind of build up our treasury, which was dwindling. One, because some of the money was misappropriated by the previous team, and also largely because the market had gone down and we'd raised a lot in Ethereum and some in Bitcoin, right? So he managed to claw back like the losses that we had on the treasury, and then make a lot of money for Fantom by getting us involved in a lot of DeFi projects from the very beginning. And so, he developed, some of the projects himself, like Yearn, like Iron Bank, that like Fix Forex, amongst many others. And also he knew obviously the other people in the space that were building at the same time, for example, like Mitch from Curve, and we heavily were invested into Curve as well. So his big contribution was also growing immensely the size of the treasury that has helped us finance basically our activities to this point in time. He's also been an advisor, helping us out with, helping us with the underlying technology, giving advice on direction and strategy. His last contribution to the code base was like in 2019, right? So he hasn't been like an active developer or active like coder to our technology, but he has provided us advice, particularly on direction or where we should be going from time to time. He also has a lot of connections in the space that he connected us with too. So for example, like the EtherScan team, so it allowed us to launch FTM Scan, which is a very, very good explorer that's based on the EtherScan technology. We have a very strong relationship with Multichain that came out of AnySwap, that came out of Fusion technology, because he used to be an advisor there as well. So he's helped us like connect to like a whole bunch of projects in the crypto ecosystem and bring them to Fantom and to integrate with Fantom and basically provide like a lot more infrastructure for our technology. So he's contributed in many ways. And like, when he announced like publicly that he was like leaving crypto, I mean, that came to me as a surprise. I remember the conversation very well. I had a talk with him. I understand the reasons why he made that decision. But he told me that, he would keep like, advising and, helping out at Fantom. So Andre like never like really left, right? And in the recent podcast, he did say that, he's still advising the Fantom Foundation and will continue to do so. And that hasn't changed. And that basically is like the status of Andre. And, more recently, he's taken an interest in, kind of like fixing the FUSD stablecoin project that we originally started and then didn't really complete at Fantom back in like late 2020. And so he published like a Fantom improvement proposal with his ideas around, and some of our ideas as well, like around like FUSD. So he is, like an active contributor, for Fantom. I have a really good relationship with him. I talk to him quite often, and he has contributed, a lot to Fantom, right? And in many ways, particularly in the early days, that a lot of people are not aware about, particularly if they have only like recently heard about Fantom and kind of like heard about like things that are going on there. I think a lot of people don't know the history, and that's why like I like to go into a lot of detail about talking about the history. And sorry, my answer's a bit long because it's probably like 10 minutes or whatever.
That's
so
okay,
I think it's
Michael.
important for people to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you go, listeners. So yeah, we know a bit more about who Andre is, and he did famously kind of leave crypto, but he's obviously been advising and working with you behind the scenes. And so well, that's all good. I suppose, Michael, it'd be good at this point if let's just look. You don't need to do it in 10 minutes. Give us the 2-minute version of just the core vision for what you guys are trying to do with Fantom. What differentiates Fantom, if anything, from any of the other leading smart contract ecosystems?
Yeah, sure. So there's like the Fantom ecosystem and the Fantom Foundation, right? Yep. So it's kind of equivalent to like how there's the Ethereum Foundation and there's like the Ethereum ecosystem, right? So the mandate of like the Fantom Foundation, which I'm the CEO of, is to grow and develop the Fantom ecosystem, right? And so the Fantom ecosystem consists of like a whole bunch of like developers who built like all sorts of applications on Fantom, primarily DeFi, but there's also some NFT applications, as well as like the users of those applications, right? So kind of our goal is twofold. Like one is to focus on developing the underlying technology. That's the most important goal for us, right? So developing the underlying technology means like improving upon like the stack that we have at the moment, which is like asynchronous processing of transactions. And what I mean by that is that unlike Bitcoin and Ethereum, we can process blocks simultaneously, right? So instead of there being like one block being mined every like 15 seconds or every like 10 minutes, a block is mined, basically on a continuous basis, and multiple blocks are validated at the same time. So like when you submit a transaction to the network, that transaction plus the surrounding transactions get packaged into what's known as a block, and they get like organized within that block, and then they get sent to the network. And that happens across the different validators. So you've got all these blocks coming into the network at different points in time, and they're all being confirmed by the validators in the network. So part of the network may like be confirming a block, another part might be confirming a block, and then eventually it gets propagated around the network, such that if you get 2/3 plus one of the total validating power validating those blocks, then you know that the blocks are final and they get appended to the chain, right? So like some of our key differences is that we can process transactions, multiple transactions simultaneously, which increases throughput. We can process transactions very, very fast because finality is deterministic, and because of the way that we do our consensus, blocks are usually created, every like 0.8 or 0.9 seconds on average. The blockchain is also like very much prunable, because you don't need all of the history of the data in order to process transactions. You only need to know basically like the headers of the block or the connections between different sequence of events in the ledger in order to confirm transactions. So it's printable, and it's also like EVM compatible. So we connected with the Ethereum virtual machine, which allows you to like program smart contracts on top of the network. So the way that you like develop and deploy smart contracts on Ethereum basically works the same way as in Fantom, right? And we've also done a lot of work in terms of improving like the underlying middleware, because eventually we want to create like a much more efficient smart contract execution engine, right? And then the other priority for us is also like working on the business development. So being able to like help builders launch on Fantom, and being able to do like a lot of like marketing and PR to basically tell people about Fantom, about what it is, about what you can do on the network, and about like what benefits the foundation can provide to builders. So we provide like free code reviews. We have a smart contract like auditing engine that we're looking to deploy on Fantom that will be very, very powerful at securing smart contracts on the network. We provide like free legal advice from our legal counsel in-house. There's a Gitcoin grants program being launched natively on our chain as well, so there will also be some grant opportunities there. So there's multiple ways that we help and encourage people to launch on Fantom. So that basically is like kind of like the situation that we have right now.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice, Michael. And I know you talked about a lot of DeFi activity is happening on Fantom, and some NFTs as well. And I know you are doing some, I guess they're partnerships or sponsorships, whatever you want to call it. Like you've worked with Pierre Gasly, who of course is an F1 driver. I just watched the Are you? I suppose, are you an F1 fan, Michael?
I am now, yeah.
Did you watch
it's pretty.
Did you watch the race today?
Not today, unfortunately. I was a bit busy, but like I often watch the races and the highlights, and I think it's like fairly obvious to people like what kind of like team and drivers I support there.
Yeah. So we'll talk us through the Pierre Gasly partnership then. So as I understand it, he's done one NFT drop, and a second one has been announced, or has that been?
I think that's concluded, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, yep. How did that all go?
Pretty good. I mean, like obviously, like the first like NFT sale, which happened, I believe, like late October, just before the Fantom Development Conference last year. That went a bit better because I think like we were kind of like had better market conditions and that sort of thing. But this more recent NFT sale was still like pretty good. In terms of like the history of the sponsorship, how it really came about is that there's a big Fantom supporter for the network called like Harry Ye, and he actually bought Fantom, I think as early as like 2019, and apparently he was telling people about like Fantom and about the technology and about like how it was an up and coming layer one, and he experimented with the technology apparently and like really liked it. So he wasn't an investor or he wasn't like someone who like purchased tokens at the ICO, but he purchased them I think about like a year later. So he's like been a big supporter of ours, and kind of to my surprise, like not just a supporter, but he really also like helped us with like organizing events, and also contributing some of his own funds to it. Without like us like asking about it at all. Like he just wanted to do it because he was passionate, and I really do like appreciate it. And I think that's very like generous and interesting from him. So he had like a mutual connection to Pierre Gasly through like a friend of his, right? And so he was interested in sponsoring Pierre Gasly and getting involved in kind of like Formula One, because I think he's also a Formula One fan. So last year he sponsored Pierre Gasly as an individual, himself as a driver, and then for the current season, for this year in 2022, he decided to sponsor the whole team. So sponsoring AlphaTauri, sponsoring Pierre Gasly, and also sponsoring Yuki as well, Sonoda. So he sponsored like the whole team on behalf of Fantom, and so he he has his own like investment company that he put the logo there as well. But he prioritized Fantom's logo. So like on the halo of the car, if you ever like watch it from like the driver's point of view, on the halo of the car, right in front is like the Fantom logo. So in any like video clips that you watch of like Pierre and Yuki from that perspective, you always see the Fantom logo right in front of you. So he really like wanted to make sure that the Fantom logo was there and that people could see it. And I have had people, message me from time to time being like, that they've seen the Fantom logo and what it was all about, such as yourselves and many others as well. F1 obviously is a very, very popular sport. So definitely a very popular sport. So in particular, it's driven a lot of like eyeballs towards Fantom and has created like an interesting conversation. So that's basically like the history of it.
Yeah, very, very correct there, Michael. And I think it's funny, if you watch any major sporting event at the moment, like F1, certainly, I'm a big F1 fan myself. So I watched the race this morning. Shout out to Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing took the race. But Crypto.com, obviously massive sponsor of everything from F1 to, I don't know, they sponsor a number of things, but I suppose what I'm getting at is you really are seeing crypto and I suppose Web3 and sports. There's a growing overlap between sports and Web3 at the moment, right?
Yeah, that for sure. And the foundation itself also sponsors a couple of F2 drivers, the Fittipaldi brothers, who's his like grandparent was like very famous for like also being like a world champion in F1. So they're like the Fittipaldi brothers are also up and coming Formula One drivers, and then in the F2 at the moment, and they're very, very nice individuals. Actually, like I really get on like along with them like quite personally, like very nice people. So we're also sponsoring those people. I also just wanted to give a shout out to them. So but I mentioned it, but like we're seeing like a lot of sponsorship happens there. I mean, happening like across different sports. So obviously, like F1 has been a number of sponsorships. Companies such as like Crypto.com, as you mentioned, the FTX has sponsored a bunch of crypto stadiums. I mean, for us at the foundation, our priority is not really like doing like too many sponsorships because we want to make sure that we have a lot of funds around, particularly during like when there's a bit of a downturn like we have right now, because of like the macro environment, largely speaking, and a few also like crypto specific reasons as well. So a lot of the funds that we have are just there to kind of like generate like income, cash flows for us, primarily through like DeFi opportunities that still exist, and also to pay for like the staff and in particular like developers. So we're very much focusing on hiring more developers, particularly to do with like core middleware development. But we do like engage in some sponsorships, but like not as many as like say like other companies that are out there.
Yeah, got it. That's all good. And it certainly makes sense, Michael, to stash some reserves and some resources for a rainy day, or AKA the bear market, which we seem to have been in for a little while, and it could just get a little bit bearier, the dirty old bear market in the months ahead. But nonetheless, I'm sure you guys will do your best to keep building in the meantime. So if that is the case, as we finish off this part of the podcast, what's coming up for you guys? What are some of the things that are on the roadmap? What are you working on? What does the rest of this year look like?
Yeah, so actually in the past week or the past couple of weeks, we solved like 2 technology problems which will allow us to basically like make significant improvements to the network. So just briefly, like one problem we solved has to do with auto pruning. So right now, you can offline prune your node. In other words, you can dramatically reduce the size of like the chain data on your validated node or non-validated node. But you have to do that by like turning off your computer or disconnect from the network running the like algorithm to like reduce the data size and then reconnecting, right? So it's very inconvenient. But we managed to like get the performance of auto pruning, which basically means like you can keep running your node while pruning your node while reducing the size of your node. We've got the performance of that quite close to the performance of offline pruning. And during our testing, it doesn't seem like it's caused any issues, with the data or anything like that. So we're doing some further testing on that, but that looks really, really good. So we're looking to push out that upgrade, fairly soon, hopefully in like 2 to 3 weeks. The other upgrade that we've got coming along is that there were, and I've talked about this before, we kind of like switched the database, the way that like it processes like transactions. We switched it from LevelDB to another database called PebbleDB. And basically, we had to do some modifications there. And there were like a few bugs with it where it was like duplicating data, right? So we managed to solve those bugs talking to the developers. So we're doing some further testing there. So hopefully we can make those releases, happen in 2 to 3 weeks. But later down the track, there's also a lot of developments happening with like, smart contract execution stack. So we've onboarded my old professor, Bernard Schultz, who started a few weeks ago on the 1st of May. There's 2 people joining in June. There's another a postdoctoral person joining in July. And so we've got these like basically like experts in their fields of programming languages to basically like build like a new virtual machine for us, like a new Fantom virtual machine, a new like way of processing data, a new way of making smart contracts basically execute a lot faster and a lot more secure than they're currently being executed. So that's a lot of the technology developments going down the roadmap.
Sounds great, Michael. Well, we certainly wish you all the best as you continue to roll out these developments. As we go deeper into the great bear market of 2022, how long will it last? We don't know, but yeah, it could be some time. Anyway, in the meantime, it is time for us to go to a very quick break, and then we'll come back. We'll finish off. We'll run Michael through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round. All right, we are back. And if you're watching on YouTube, we've been here all along. But Michael, I like to finish each Crypto Conversation podcast with a quick round of rapid fire Crypto Conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just quick, snappy hot take answers. Michael, you're a talker, which is fine, but here we go. Hot take style. Question 1: where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
Well, I definitely believe in like multiple chains. Yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't have been involved in Ethereum. I wouldn't have been involved in Fantom if I obviously was a Bitcoin maxi. That would have been a contradiction. So I'm definitely on the multiple chain side.
Yep, I think we knew that. No surprises there, Michael. What would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
That eventually the technology will scale to be as large as the internet. So that's sort of like a big claim. But when people ask me like, how early are we on? I always say, think about the number of users there are. When there are the same number of users or roughly the same number of users as the number of people who use the internet, I'd say we'll kind of like reach the peak in terms of adoption. But if we're like significantly below that, which we are currently, we're still very early.
Yep, makes sense to me.
But I'm convinced it will happen. Yeah.
Nice. Michael, Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. So with that in mind, anything you like here, blockchain or Fantom specifically, what does it look like in 10 years' time?
I think in 10 years' time, we'll have the technology developed to such an extent that we will be able to scale to as many users as the internet, because there's a lot of unsolved problems at the moment. For example, like sharding, so being able to break down the validation into like different parts of the network. That's a very, very difficult problem to solve, but I think it will be solved within 10 years. I think definitely earlier than 10 years, but not 2.
Yeah.
Anyone who's claiming within 2, I think is overestimating.
Totally. All right. The flip side of that, Michael, is that a famous quote by William Gibson, who said, of course, that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
I think it's like what you can do with like blockchain technology. So a lot of people say like, oh, blockchain technology is used for like NFTs, it's used for DeFi. But no, you can use it for a whole range of things. You can use it for supply chain management. You can use it for creating what's known as like P2P based, group based insurance. that solves a lot of problems with the insurance industry. There are many different use cases of blockchain technology which aren't really talked about. These days it's mainly like DeFi and NFTs, at least when it comes to like smart contracts.
Absolutely. All right, time to get weird just for a second, Michael. Time to zoom out. What do you see as the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
Um, I'm quite pessimistic about like humanity as a whole. I think we're going to see a lot more, unfortunately, like socialism and communism than we currently have. I think when you look at how people vote, it's trending towards that direction. I think people have not studied history, have not studied the horrors of particularly the 20th century, of crazy ideologies like Nazism and socialism, communism, that sort of thing, and the number of people that they've killed. And they now think that some of these ideas are looking a bit more attractive when that's completely the wrong track.
Yep.
So but I think when people realize how bad it is again, we'll go into another cycle of people realizing that engaging in letting people being free, free markets, free individuals, letting people live the lives that they want to live themselves. I think we'll come back to that eventually. I think it's kind of like a cycle.
It's definitely like a cycle. All right, let's start to finish this off, Michael. Finally, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, a TV show, or universe?
Oh, probably like Brave New World. Yeah, I thought the ideas about like what is philosophy versus and what is philosophy and ideas versus what is just biology is like a very interesting concept that is explored, because they kind of talked about like what is happiness, right? And on the one hand you can say, oh, like happiness is like being able to like explore ideas and think for yourself. On the other hand, if you're looking at it purely from biology, you could say happiness is all just a chemical process, right? It's all just like dopamine, serotonin, and you can take drugs like they call it soma in the book, and that makes people happy, right? So I think that's a very interesting discussion to have.
Yep, that makes sense. And of course, Brave New Coin was named after Brave New World.
Yeah, and I didn't do that like intentionally just for the podcast. Like I genuinely think that's a very interesting book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but there's this kind of quite interesting juxtaposition between the dystopian futures depicted in 1984 by George Orwell and A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and they're both kind of opposites, but there's parts of both are very much in the world today. The kind of the core idea, I guess, being in A Brave New World, people just are amusing themselves to death when they have all the conveniences of the modern world available to them, but to the point of overuse and distraction. Of course, 1984 is the opposite. It's surveillance capitalism taken to an authoritarian extreme. Yeah, interesting. Always a balance, Michael, right?
Yeah, like 1984 is also like a book that I really enjoyed reading because I think there's a lot of lessons there that people can kind of like compare to like what has been happening in the real world, right? I mean, like, not to go on for too long, but just an example, there's all this control about speech, right? Oh, we can't say certain words, or we have to use like certain like phrases and stuff. We can't offend people and that sort of thing. If you look at 1984, it talks about the dangers of going down that path, because it talks about creating a new language or a subsidiary of English called like Newspeak, right? Where you just constantly eliminate words such that the way that you express yourself becomes very limited. And we see that right now with all of the censorship across like different platforms, and like social censorship where people say, oh, you said a bad word, use the wrong pronoun, this and that, and you get like eviscerated for it. And I think that's a very dangerous path. And I think if people want to learn about what path we should not go down, they should read 1984 and they should compare to the parallels that we have in our world today. I'm like, yeah. Obviously we don't live in a 1984 world, but there are some parallels that are important to know.
Totally, and I just found this quote that I was looking for in the meantime, Michael, which is probably a nice way to finish. So to sum it up, what Orwell feared was those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much information that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Yeah, both of those sides very much relevant in today's world.
I totally agree with those statements. I think they're very relevant.
All right. Thank you, Michael. This has been a lot of fun. Please close out the show. Tell the people where they can go if they want to find you on Twitter or wherever else you hang out, and what they should do if they want to learn more about the Fantom ecosystem and what you and Andre are up to.
Yeah, so first and foremost, like our website is Fantom.Foundation. So on Fantom.Foundation, you'll see more about the technology, the applications that exist on the platform. You'll see a lot of our social links as well, to Twitter, to Discord, to Telegram, to other channels. You'll see like career opportunities that are there as well, and more a bit about the team and the technology. And of course, like links to technical papers. But like we usually push out our updates first and foremost on our Twitter. So that's at Fantom FDN. So at Fantom FDN, you'll see the latest updates. We tweet, almost on a daily basis, sometimes several times throughout the day about like, new events we'll be at, new podcasts and interviews that have been done, such as this one, new projects that are deployed on Fantom, and just like new articles about, like what's up and coming about Fantom as well. So, go to our Twitter at Fantom.Foundation, at Fantom FDN, and also our website, Fantom.Foundation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. All the best, and bye for now.
Yeah, thanks so much as well. I really appreciate the opportunity. See ya.
All right, there you go. That was Michael from Fantom. Fascinating character, fascinating discussion. I certainly learnt a bit about Fantom and the history with Andre there. And I always love it when I get to rock out my 1984 comparison quote with Brave New World. Yes, so did enjoy that. Thanks for listening, team. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using, or here on YouTube. Yeah, but hey, thanks, team. That was today's show. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. See ya.